This presentation is about what happened in 2011 when President Chavez stopped Venezuela's nuclear energy program. There had been a plan to install some nuclear reactors in Venezuela, and Chavez stopped that. And I'll talk about why that happened. Now, Venezuela is the country with the world's largest oil reserves, so you might wonder were they interested in nuclear energy? Well, the government's policy for many, many years, it predates Chavez, has been to maximize oil production for export and not use oil for domestic purposes. They make most of their export earnings from the export of oil, and so that's what they wanted to emphasize. And so over the years, oil-fired power plants were not built in Venezuela. Instead, what Venezuela has relied on for a long time has been hydroelectric power generation. Generators at the Guri Dam produce about 75% of the electric power used in Venezuela. But obviously, during periods of drought, when that water drops to low levels, electric power generation goes down. They're very vulnerable to environmental conditions in producing hydroelectric power for most of the country from that single dam. So actually, in 1978, a long time before Chavez became president, the International Atomic Energy Agency recommended that the Venezuelan government consider using nuclear energy, building some plants, because the organization, the IAEA, had done studies saying hydroelectric generation in Venezuela would reach a peak at some point and come to a standstill, making the country extremely vulnerable. And so the International Atomic Energy Agency recommended that Venezuela develop the programs. So Chavez was elected president in 1998, and one of the goals was to diversify energy resources. Now, there are three countries in Latin America that had nuclear energy reactors. Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina had nuclear reactors, and Argentina, in fact, had sold nuclear reactors to other countries like Egypt and Australia. And so Venezuela, being in Latin America, there was an opening there in Latin America with nuclear energy, and Chavez pursued it. He was very close with Argentina's president, Kirchner, and they had cooperated on other projects. So what happened in 2005 was that Venezuela approached Argentina to ask to sell it a medium-sized nuclear reactor. But the United States government put pressure on Argentina not to follow through. The United States had problems with Chavez, and so they did not want to see other countries helping him. And so they pressured Argentina into not developing a nuclear relationship with Venezuela. What happened in 2008 was that Russian President Dmitry Medvedev became the first Russian president to ever visit Venezuela. And one of the things they did when the Russian president visited Caracas was to develop a cooperation agreement to develop nuclear energy in Venezuela. And they established a working group. And then in 2009, Chavez went to Moscow and visited with Vladimir Putin. And they announced that they'd created an atomic energy commission. Again, they're simply studying it, they're simply looking into it, and trying to figure out what would be involved if they actually went forward with an agreement. And Chavez basically said, we're going to develop nuclear energy with peaceful aims, just like Brazil and Argentina have. Well, what happened in 2009 and 2010 illustrated the vulnerability that the country had with regarding relying on hydroelectric power. The water levels at the Guri Dam declined so low that some of the turbines stopped working. Electric generation at the dam, which supplied 75% of the electricity in Venezuela, declined by 50%. And they had rolling blackouts throughout Venezuela as a result of this problem. So Chavez declared a national electric emergency. The government had to develop a rationing plan, announce a series of billing sanctions and rewards based on a customer's energy use. If you use less energy, um, you would get rewarded for that. Um, and he fired the energy minister, saying, "You really have not addressed this problem, and we've got a serious national issue." And Chavez did develop a program, 4 years, or they were going to spend $13 billion, and they were going to add thermoelectric plants. They were going to add oil and gas power plants as part of his plan. But also, part of his plan was getting together with Russia and following up on this initiative for an agreement between Russia and Venezuela to develop nuclear energy. They signed an agreement in Moscow so that the Russian state nuclear power company, Rosatom, would come to Venezuela and build two nuclear reactors for the country to use. Now, the chief executive of the Russian Atomic Commission was pretty cautious in what he said. He said, "Look, we don't know exactly when we're going to start this work. It could be 10 years, it could be sooner." There were some issues that they still needed to address. There was certainly the cost involved, but also there was a lack of expertise in Venezuela in terms of nuclear energy. They had relied on hydroelectric power for so long. There was not an educated group of scientists in Venezuela who could effectively work on or cooperate in the development and conduct of a nuclear energy plan and program and reactors. But that didn't stop the United States from being very critical and cautious about what was going on. Here's a U.S. State Department spokesman that said, we're going to be watching this very, very closely. You've got Russia getting together with Venezuela, developing nuclear energy. This was, the United States was pretty concerned about any expansion of a program like that and weapons and this was of serious concern to the U.S. Connie Mack, who was a representative, Republican from Florida, said Hugo Chavez is not a man who can be trusted with nuclear energy. Again, the United States had gone out of its way, and a lot of these legislators had gone out of their way to demonize Chavez over the years, and here he was going to get involved with nuclear energy, something that they could beat the drumbeat about. Mark Weisbrod, who is director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, had a different point of view. He said, "Look, there's no reason this is a threat to anyone." People, critics like Mack, says only countries that U.S. Approves of should have nuclear energy for their purpose. And here is Venezuela. They need to have this alternative energy source. It's clear that they need it. But because we've demonized Venezuela over the years, it becomes an issue it shouldn't be. It becomes just another one of the tools in the toolbox, so to speak, to demonize Chavez, where in fact the country absolutely needed to diversify its energy resources. Well, what happened in 2011 at the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan changed everything. This plant was one of the 15 largest nuclear power plants in the world. You can see it's protected from the Pacific Ocean. It's right on the Pacific Ocean. It has a seawall. But in 2011, a tsunami with 46-foot high waves, up, 4 stories, 5 stories high, overtopped that seawall and came over the nuclear power plant. And there was a serious nuclear accident on March 11, 2011. There were partial nuclear core meltdowns, explosions, release of highly radioactive water. It was a disaster. Radiation releases forced the evacuation of 83,000 residents from towns around the plant. A serious nuclear accident that got worldwide attention. So on March 17, 2011, Chavez says he stopped it. He stopped the plans to develop a nuclear energy program in light of that crisis in Japan. Chavez said the dangers of developing nuclear power were too great. It's something extremely risky and dangerous for the whole world. Even though the country needed to diversify its energy resources, and nuclear had been recommended to Venezuela as long ago as 1978, Chavez stopped the program. And I don't think he got a bit of credit from the media, from the United States government, in terms of taking this, what many saw as a very, very responsible decision on his part. The Venezuela Reader maintains a blog, and on the blog there is a write-up of this issue and this event that took place. And so all the documents and sources used to put this talk together are outlined in that write-up.